quickly weigh in on that breaking news of the moment. It literally, Kim, you can pop back in, and essentially, James Comer sent out a giant AT&T subpoena last week, asking for more than a decade of phone records related to Joe Biden's son Hunter. That's essentially it, right, Kim?
Right. 10 years worth of records, texts and calls, wants the logs for Hunter Biden's phone since 2011.
You know, there's an old saying among lawyers: when the facts are against you, argue the law. When the law is against you, argue the facts. And when you have neither, I would add, just issue subpoenas and see what you might get in a fishing expedition.
Yeah.
So indeed, that's what it looks like we have here. You know, you've written, and you've just written, a new column related to something that you've spoken of quite extensively on this show and elsewhere, and that is the money that Donald Trump is on the hook for. You know that Donald Trump coffers better than anyone. You show the math in book after book, and you, among those things that you've shown, indicate that Donald Trump doesn't have the money to meet these bond requirements during his appeals. And already he's posted this $91 million bond. And where that money came from is really relevant.
Yes, I have a piece which will go up very soon, hopefully in the next hour, at msnbc.com or msn.com. And it's about this very point. Donald, remember, 9 years ago, told us repeatedly he was worth more than $10 billion. In fact, one time he said $11 billion. When he became president, he asked if he could file his required ethics disclosure statement that all federal officers have to file without signing under penalty of perjury. You know, if you file your tax return without signing it, you haven't filed your tax return. And so the Office of Government Ethics said, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Trump, you have to sign under penalty of perjury. My analysis of his net worth, and I was being very generous at the time, was a little over $1 billion. Forbes magazine, which has always given enormous value to the Trump brand, valued his fortune at a little over $3 billion. Of course, neither of those is within 100 miles of more than $10 billion, because Donald just makes this stuff up. And while we have very limited disclosures, we know that Trump claims that he has these enormously profitable golf courses in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Under British law, he has to reveal revenues and costs and either profits or losses, and he just loses money hand over fist. And throughout his career, Donald has never been a wealth creator. He is a wealth extractor. Had he just taken the $400 million or so he got from his dad and thrown it into the S&P 500 by buying Vanguard's index fund, and withdrawn 1 or 2% a year, you know, he would be a multi-billionaire today. But that's not what he does. Money just runs through Donald's hands. And I would point out that based on Stormy Daniels' statement about their quote-unquote affair, the payoff to her works out to be about $60 million a year for sex.
That's a great fact that I've not heard anywhere else.
Just take $135,000 by 47 seconds. I think that was her count. Do the math. The deeper problem here, the one my article will go into in detail, and I don't want to go into too much here because it isn't published yet, is this. The framers of our Constitution, and remember, we live in the second American Republic. The first American Republic under the Articles of Confederation failed because it had no power to tax and no power to regulate business. So we overthrew that government in 1787 and got our Constitution. And the framers of that Constitution were incredibly deeply worried, because they were pioneers in the idea that people could govern themselves, about money influencing federal officials, especially the president. So we have the word emoluments appears in the Constitution 3 times. The focus was on sources of income. So we don't want the states, which are co-equal generally to the federal government, to be putting any money in the pocket of the president. And we don't want foreign governments doing so. Well, Donald Trump just flouted that left and right. A lot of money from state governments flowed into his businesses. and so did money from foreign entities. He claims he gave away the profits, but there's no accounting or anything. It's just his word that he did this. What the framers, who are not the same as the founders who wrote the Declaration, there's only about 20% were in both groups. What the framers of our Constitution focused on was income. It never occurred to them that they would need to think about a president who was in hoc to an un-American or non-American entity. Well, Chubb Insurance, which issued the $91.6 million bond, is a Zurich-based company. It has an American CEO, but it's a Swiss company. It owns 3 insurance companies in Russia. It may have other business connections with Russians because of the oligarchs, Putin's oligarchs, who are the biggest, best-funded criminal gang in the history of the world. They're all actual multi-billionaires. The president of the president of that company is an American. He comes from a family long involved in the insurance business and in many dealings that have drawn litigation, the interests of securities regulators and others because of the way they run their businesses. They're very profitable, but I would not describe them as scrupulous in the way they run their businesses. Now, there's a real national security nightmare here. Presumably, the bond that Trump needs to put up by Monday a week, the 25th of March, presumably that bond will also come from Chubb. It would be really complicated to have bonds from 2 different companies. And that means that this entity will have more than $500 million leverage on Trump. It does business in Russia where you only can do business with the permission or implicit approval of Vladimir Putin, who is a murderous dictator. And this is really disturbing. Now, there's the group Move On is still around. They are circulating a petition right now. They sent a copy of it to me today. I don't sign petitions unless they're about journalism. But they sent a petition around demanding that no national security secrets be revealed to candidate Trump. It's been longstanding practice that if you're a candidate to be president, you get the same briefing the president gets. And I think that in this case is a really dangerous idea because we know that Trump has given away sources and methods. Who told us and how did we learn that? To the Russians. We know that he's done that to an Australian businessman. We know that he's joked about it with the ghostwriter for a book by one of his compadres. Donald has no muffler on about what he knows and what you have to keep secret. I mean, think about the fact that in 2011, at the Gridiron Dinner, that's this dumb Washington White House press corps dinner they do every year, he made fun of Donald Trump. He stood there and his joke writers had written for him, as they always do, his talk. And President Obama said, I think about the weighty decisions that face Donald Trump. Should I fire Meatloaf? And everybody in the room laughed, the video shows, except Donald Trump, who can't take a joke about himself. What we didn't know at the time was that was the night that they were executing the capture and ended up being assassination of Osama bin Laden. They had to delay it 24 hours because of some concerns that Obama had that he held back. But you wouldn't know that from watching his talk. He was, he knew how to keep secrets. Joe Biden knows how to keep secrets. George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, they all knew how you keep these very important secrets. Not Donald. Donald has no mental barriers of any kind. If he thought it would, get him sexual favors from some woman he fancies, he'd give the nuclear codes away. I mean that quite literally. He has no internal controls of any kind like this, and he has no conscience. He is an immoral man because he is fundamentally amoral. There is no right or wrong. There's only strategic self-interest, as in a feral animal that, looks at its situation and decides whether to fight or flee and how to do it.
Well, he even in his early meeting with the Russians at the White House, David, I think you had mentioned before, and you've detailed the ways that there were literally secrets that he let fly in that meeting. It was a private meeting he had at that time. So you're suggesting essentially that in this way that Chubb, the company that posted the bond, has ties to Russia, it's a circuitous way, perhaps, not even that circuitous, like just a little bit roundabout, to suggest that Trump then becomes beholden to another entity. It's the very situation that you described the founders probably could never have envisioned, or the framers could never have envisioned.
And the mere fact that he could be, I mean, I don't want to particularly cast aspersions on Chubb, but they do have business interests, and we don't know, as Andrew Weissman, the former FBI general counsel, has pointed out, we don't know what arrangement is behind this bond. I mean, for all we know, one of the oligarchs said, I'll put up money to guarantee that this will get paid at the end of the day, which would be a disaster. Appearances matter and prospects of problems matter. And imagine for a second, if Joe Biden owed over $500 million to Chubb, what would you be hearing from James Comer, running the committee investigating Hunter Biden? What would you be hearing from Mitch McConnell? What would you be hearing from Sean Hannity and from the former host Tucker Carlson? And I think we all know, my God, impeach the man yesterday. This is unacceptable.
It is odd, David, to see the lopsided way in which this stuff plays out at the high. And I'm talking at the congressional level,
Yes.
Then there's this, and this is sort of in keeping with that. Adam Schiff, you can see this is on the screen now, hoping that they dumb down Trump's briefings after his negligence with classified documents. This sort of relates to it in the sense that there is a briefing that continues to go on for former presidents. Can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. The absolutely certain to be next junior senator from California, Adam Schiff, because Steve Garvey has no chance of winning. That's why Schiff worked hard to get him enough votes to come in number 2 ahead of Jimmy Porter. Adam Schiff made a perfectly reasonable observation. Donald doesn't know anything. Let's remember, he thought Finland was part of Russia. He didn't understand or know at all why there's a memorial over the USS Arizona when he arrived. There's a man who doesn't know Pearl Harbor Day. Perhaps it was just a gaffe, but he once talked about the British Air Force during the War of 1812. And Frederick Douglass being alive. He's buried quite close to my home, and he died 125 years ago. Donald literally doesn't know anything. It's all a bluff. He didn't know the casino business when he was in it, which I initially found hard to believe until I interviewed him a number of times and realized his executives were telling me the truth. He was completely lacking in knowledge. Everything is a bluff. Even though he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects and to be the best expert of all history on taxes, a subject on which I am a world-recognized expert. And so Donald doesn't understand the things that are in the national security briefs. He wouldn't understand the issues, for example, between the leadership of the Kurds with the Turks, the Syrians, and the Iraqis. He wouldn't know a Sunni from a Shia. Now, I don't expect most Americans to understand the difference between Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, but if you're the president of the United States, that's something you need to know extremely well. You need to know perhaps not as well as the back of your hand, but how about the palm of your hand?
You should certainly know that what countries are aligned with what part of the Shiite or
right. And in
faith.
addition to all of this, remember that in Helsinki in 2018, Trump said he didn't trust the American. He said this publicly. He didn't trust the American intelligence agencies, but he took Vladimir Putin at his word because he was trustworthy, which all by itself ought to be enough to disqualify you from being president. And then he went and met with Putin with no one else in the room except Russians. So we have no idea what was said, what he did. Absolutely none. And the one time he did meet with a translator in criminal violation of federal law, he took the translator's notes away and tore them up. Those are government documents that belong to us. But Donald, who it's been his practice his whole life to, at the end of the month, tear up and throw away his calendar. So there are no records. He doesn't use email because people on email, as federal prosecutors have taught me, they forget now and then they write something that is incriminating, and that's how you get convictions.
Well, and stuff can be recovered. We know that the White House toilets were filled with all those torn up documents. I mean, destruction of documents seems to be kind of the coin of the realm.
Yes.
With Donald Trump. I want to double back to a little bit of what you were saying when you talk about perhaps a donor trail of some kind, or for the company that posted the bond, but also the donor trail on the TikTok reversal that Donald Trump has made. And Steve Bannon has actually suggested that Donald Trump has been bought. And it was an odd thing. He said it over the weekend. He said that his shift in his stance on TikTok, that is Trump's shift, he thinks is owing to some kind of relationship that may have, persuaded him that TikTok should be hands off.
Yeah, well, let's remember that Steve Bannon, who is a young man, was a naval officer, is one of the prime architects of the Trump effort to, as he put it, deconstruct the administrative state, which is obtuse language for overthrow the government and make the president dictator. And I think Steve Bannon's comment deserves weight, and we should think about it. I mean, Donald doesn't know national security. He doesn't know world history. He doesn't know tax or accounting or nuclear weapons or anything else he claims. What Donald knows is value. He's really good at that. He can look at a blank piece of land, look at the place, what's around it, and recognize whether it's highly valuable, lightly valuable, or not worth his time. I mean, he's real good at that. You got to admire his skill at two things. As a con artist, he's the greatest con artist in the history of the world, and at recognizing value. And when he flip-flopped on TikTok, I had the same thought Steve Bannon did. Gee, I wonder which Chinese interest is somehow putting money in his pocket, taking care of him. Maybe they're behind Chubb's willingness to make this very risky loan, a bond, so that Trump can appeal the E. Jean Carroll's second defamation case without having any of his property seized. That's a loan. That's a form of a loan made to Trump. A loan they have to pay off on when he loses his appeal, as he will. He might get some modest reduction in the amount, but he will lose. There's no basis to overturn the judge's ruling. And when this happens again now, March 25th, as we expect, with the New York State Persistent Fraud Award, where he's got to put up more than $450 million, it's entirely possible that China is, or a Chinese agent is in the background. I mean, let's remember the Chinese agent infiltrated Mar-a-Lago, that the Republicans' primary witnesses against Hunter Biden, one turned out to be a Russian agent, but the other turned out to be a Chinese agent. And the FBI director, Christopher Wray, a Trump appointee who Biden has kept on, has said in no uncertain terms that that the Russians have thousands of undercover agents operating in the U.S. and that counterintelligence officers keep bumping up against them. And people should know that in counterintelligence, you don't just go arrest people when you find out who they are. Once you know who they are, you want to watch them. You want to see who they're talking to. You want to see where the connections go. The object is not to get criminal convictions or get people thrown out of the country. It's to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and most importantly, who they are doing it with.
Wow, it's a pretty bizarre picture. And just in that context, David, let me go back to this petition that's being circulated. So the former president does receive briefings. Should those briefings, you can't modify them based on, or can you?
No, sure you can. No. I mean, the briefer has a lot of discretion about what he says and does. One thing they could do in the briefings is actually go the opposite direction of what Adam Schiff recommended. Put them in serious bureaucratic language, which Joe Biden or Barack Obama or Richard Nixon would get. I'm not so sure about George H.W. Bush would get. But put it in such a deep bureaucratic language that it wouldn't mean anything. And use the classic abbreviations, HUMINT, HUMINT, that's human intelligence, SIGINT, SIGINT. And, I say all this as somebody who I've literally exposed spies and foreign agents. So while this is not the core of my business, I have a good understanding of the principles that are involved here.
I wonder whether he would just push them on to others. One of the that seems to be his basic. He has, it would seem, based on all of your reporting that came out of the White House during his administration, he has such an ephemeral interest in everything. I mean, just like he'll stick with something for 15 seconds and move on to the next thing. Yep. The Mar-a-Lago worker, our last couple of minutes here with David Cay Johnston, who is the Trump employee number 5. He's now come out of the shadows. And I thought his statements about how things were moved and how documents were going out as the FBI was coming in was both compelling and convincing. And in a weird way, David, he seemed to be an unwitting participant. Did you get that as well?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. He was simply, he's a functionary, and he did the function he had, and was reluctant at first because he didn't appreciate what was going on. But as it dawned on him what was happening, he in fact proved to be a patriotic citizen, as opposed to all the people Donald has had sign non-disclosure agreements, paid them money to not be cooperative. Alan Weiselberg, as chief financial officer, just pled guilty to perjury during the civil fraud trial in New York, where Judge Engoron makes it clear that, with one exception, every single witness for the Trump side, including Trump and his 3 older sons and his daughter, 2 older sons and his daughter, either was utterly incompetent and unqualified or lied. Every single one, because that's how Donald does business. It's not like the way most of us live. It's like his marriages. All 3 of his marriages are transactional relationships. And I know some people have a very hard time understanding that, but there are people who get married for reasons that have nothing to do with love and romance. They have to do with other matters. Anyway, I think that the Democrats should be paying close attention to how much information is provided to Trump, and if he says anything that is out of school from these briefings, I think it's incumbent on Biden, whether he does it directly or through surrogates, to pounce on that and point out that Trump is not trustworthy.
I would hit the document thing. As you know, I feel like this is the easiest case to understand, and we're not going to get it to a court in time. But I just think it's so indefensible, so bizarre, so over the top, the thousands of documents in bathrooms and ballrooms and bedrooms. It's absolute insanity. I wish there was more talk of that. I know I have to let you go. I so appreciate you being here. I will recommend your piece. It's in MSN.com. It's on the MSNBC website.
Yeah, I don't know if it's up yet. When I went on the air, that I'd signed off on the edits, and so it's just a function of how long it takes them to post it. But I would encourage people to read it, because I think you'll have a good understanding of the dangers posed by a president being in debt and the loophole in our Constitution that never occurred to the framers. And the framers were very concerned. This is one thing I teach my students at Syracuse University College of Law, is the framers were very concerned, not so much about individual acts of venality. That's always going to happen. They were concerned about institutionalizing and institutional corruption. And Trump is right critical to understanding that idea. And this is one of the areas where, we need to seriously look at updating our 18th century Constitution.
We should open up the hood on a lot of things, maybe that among them. We'll look for that piece when it drops, and we will connect it with a hot link under this video, everyone. David, thank you. We look forward to Tuesdays. Appreciate it. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.